I want a divorce. Now. Andrew's voice hit Mary like a cold wave, sending a chill down her spine as she lay in the sterile labor room, cradling their newborn in her arms. Her body was weak, still bleeding from the delivery, but nothing compared to the overwhelming shock of his words. You trapped me, Mary. This is your last chance to sign the papers. Let's end this now before it gets worse. Mary's heart shattered, but something else began to stir within her, a simmering anger, a realization that Andrew had just made a grave mistake. As he handed her the divorce papers, his eyes filled with arrogance, Mary didn't feel defeated. She had a secret that could destroy everything he'd fought for. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. What Andrew didn't know, what neither he nor his mistress Claire could ever have imagined, was that Mary had just inherited $1 billion, a fortune left by her estranged father, a man who had never been part of her life. But the money came with a curse. Her father's past was steeped in shadows, and with it she had the power to ruin everything Andrew and Claire had carefully built. Let's go back to the start. Mary's journey didn't begin in that hospital room. It began long before, in a life filled with dreams, heartbreak, and betrayal. But one thing she never realized: her strength was hiding beneath the surface, waiting for this moment to come alive. And now, Mary was about to take back everything they had stolen from her. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've missed you. Thank you for standing with me through the technical issues. We're finally steady again, and your support is the reason this channel keeps going. Before we begin, I want to speak a quick blessing over everyone watching. To the women, may God strengthen your spirit and calm every storm in your heart. To the men, may God guide your steps and multiply your efforts, and may His protection stay over every one of you. Amen. I'm also celebrating my very first subscribers. Thank you. Your support means more than you know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your subscription, your likes, and your shares to friends and family keep this channel alive and growing. It truly makes a difference. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, so I know you're here with me. Now let's get into today's story. In the moments that followed Andrew's betrayal, Mary knew she couldn't stay in the life she had known. The sterile hospital room, once a place where she hoped to hold on to the last shred of happiness in her marriage, now felt suffocating. The walls, white and indifferent, mirrored the coldness that Andrew had just shown her. The papers in her hands were still warm, the ink barely dry, as though the divorce had been signed in haste, just another transaction in the cruel game he had played. But Mary couldn't focus on the papers. Not yet. Her mind was still reeling from the combination of the birth and the blow of Andrew's words. She should have been basking in the joy of welcoming their child into the world, but instead she felt an overwhelming emptiness. Asterisk. How had it come to this? Asterisk, she wondered. The phone call she had received earlier that day from her father's lawyer still echoed in her ears, as real and heavy as the papers she now held in her hands. Her father, a man she had never known, had died weeks earlier. The news of his passing felt like a strange, distant thing, like a movie she wasn't part of, and yet, in that same breath, she had learned that he had left her a fortune, an inheritance that seemed so surreal that it was almost impossible to grasp. $1 billion. It had come with a simple statement. Her father's will, his final words, had been clear. He had left everything to her, but that was just the beginning of the story. Her inheritance came with the ominous weight of secrets, dark secrets that Mary hadn't yet unraveled. Her father's business dealings, the shady individuals he had been involved with, and the world of corruption that surrounded him. It was all there, in a locked file buried in the lawyer's office. She knew only fragments, but even those fragments felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. Sitting there, alone in the hospital bed, she began to question everything she thought she knew about her life. Her father, a man she had never met, had been more than just a shadow in her past. He had been a powerful figure, involved in murky affairs that could ruin not only him, but anyone who had the misfortune of crossing his path. As Mary shifted in the bed, her body still aching from the labor, she thought of Andrew. His face had been cold, calculating. The same man who had once promised to love and cherish her now stood before her as if she were nothing more than a nuisance. You trapped me, he had said. The accusation had burned, deeper than the physical pain of childbirth. What hurt more than the divorce papers was the cruelty in his voice, the utter disregard for her, his wife, the mother of his child. And as the truth about Andrew's affair with Claire, the woman who had been working as his colleague for years, began to take shape in her mind, the anger within her grew like wildfire. Claire, the woman who had wormed her way into their lives, pretending to be nothing more than a friend, had been conspiring with Andrew behind Mary's back. The realization hit Mary hard. How long had they been planning this? Was the pregnancy the only thing that had kept Andrew from fully abandoning her? Mary couldn't stop the flood of disgust that rose within her, but as the anger turned inward, a new feeling began to emerge, one she hadn't expected. Power. For the first time in months, Mary felt like she had a way out. The inheritance, the billion-dollar fortune that had come with so much more than just money, offered a path, one that could lead her away from the ruins of her marriage, from the shackles Andrew had placed on her. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She wasn't just a woman scorned, she wasn't a victim of Andrew's betrayal. She was now a woman who held the keys to a power greater than anything Andrew could imagine. The cold, sterile walls of the hospital room, the quiet hum of machines, faded into the background as Mary took a deep breath, focusing on what lay ahead. The child in her arms, her baby, was her responsibility now. Not Andrew's, not Claire's, and the world outside this room, the world that had been built on lies and deceit, was about to change. She could feel it, the shift inside her. The betrayal had awakened something in her, something fierce and untamed. Andrew had thought he was leaving her with nothing, but in that moment, she knew better. Mary wasn't just fighting for her future, she was fighting for her son's future, and for the first time, it felt like the fight was truly hers to win. She closed her eyes, the soft sound of her baby's breathing calming her racing thoughts. A strange determination washed over her. This was far from over. Andrew thought he could walk away from her. Claire thought she could take it all, her life, her money, her future, but they were wrong. Mary had a secret, and she was going to use it. The fight for her freedom, her legacy, had only just begun. If you've ever been betrayed by the one person you trusted most, you understand the gut-wrenching pain of what Mary's going through. But what happens next will leave you speechless. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming power. Hit subscribe and stand with Mary as she changes her fate. Mary sat in her small, dimly lit apartment, surrounded by stacks of legal papers. The crisp scent of freshly printed documents filled the air, but there was nothing clean about the weight they carried. As her baby slept soundly in the crib nearby, Mary let the silence wash over her, the only sound, the occasional rustle of papers, as she sifted through the inheritance her estranged father had left her. The lawyer's office had been quiet, almost too quiet. When she picked up the documents, she hadn't known what to expect. Only that this inheritance, this legacy, was something that could change her life in ways she hadn't even begun to understand. But now, as she slowly flipped through the papers, the weight of it all began to settle in her chest. The will, simple and to the point, left everything to her, her father's assets, his investments, his businesses. The fortune he had built from the ground up was now hers, a billion-dollar empire. But as she continued reading, the complexity of her father's world unfolded in front of her eyes. It wasn't just wealth, it wasn't just money, it was power. And it was corrupted. Mary found herself staring at a list of business dealings, properties bought under questionable circumstances, offshore accounts that raised more questions than they answered, and deals with people who didn't just deal in money but in darker things. Her father had worked with powerful individuals in industries that didn't just deal with real estate and investments. No, his empire was tied to things far more dangerous: money laundering, illegal trade, and connections to organized crime. Her heart pounded in her chest as she processed what she was reading. This isn't just inheritance. Mary thought, her mind racing. Asterisk. This is a legacy of corruption. Asterisk. And the deeper she dug, the more she saw the web her father had woven. Some of the names listed, those connected to illegal deals, were terrifyingly familiar. Names that Andrew, her husband, would have known. Names that were tied to Claire, the woman who had stolen everything from her. There it was, like a sinister thread running through everything Andrew had been involved in, a trail of money, deceit, and crime. Her hands trembled as she read further, discovering that Andrew's business dealings, his ties to shady investors, were more than just casual connections. They were deeply embedded in the same network her father had operated within. And Claire? She was no innocent bystander. She had been involved too. Mary had unknowingly married a man whose ambitions stretched beyond her, who had wrapped himself in a cloak of corruption, all while pretending to be the good, loving husband. Mary's stomach twisted as she absorbed the full scope of what she had inherited. Her father's fortune wasn't just an opportunity, it was a burden, one that would tie her to a world she hadn't known existed. The internal conflict hit her like a physical blow. Should she claim this inheritance? Should she embrace the power and use it to build her future, or was it a dark gift, one that came with too much baggage, too many dangerous strings attached? And what about Andrew and Claire? Could she use her newfound wealth and her father's secrets to expose them for the corruption they had been involved in? As her mind swirled with the weight of her decision, one thing became clear. This inheritance had the power to ruin Andrew and Claire, but in the process, would it ruin her, too? The answer, she knew, would change everything. The days that followed Andrew's betrayal felt like a blur, an endless cycle of shock, disbelief, and sorrow. The initial sting of his words in the labor room still lingered in her chest, gnawing at her from the inside out. But as the reality of her situation set in, so did something else. The rage. It grew slowly at first, a quiet, simmering anger that, over time, crystallized into something much colder and sharper. Mary could no longer afford the luxury of tears. She had been broken, yes, but she wasn't going to stay that way. Andrew had thought he could dispose of her like a piece of trash, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know that the woman he betrayed was now holding the keys to a fortune and to his downfall. The inheritance wasn't just a windfall, it was a weapon, and Mary was going to wield it. The first step was to gain control of the world her father had left behind. His business empire, tangled in corruption and deceit, needed someone to take the reins, and it might as well be her. But first, she needed to understand the full scope of it all, to gather the allies she would need to confront Andrew and Claire. Sitting at the small kitchen table, Mary dialed the number of her father's former associate. His name was Richard Hale, a man who had been in the business world with her father for decades. She didn't know him well, but her father had trusted him, and right now, that was enough. The phone rang, then clicked. His voice, raspy and wary, answered. "Richard Hale," he said flatly. "Mr. Hale, this is Mary Cole, my father's daughter." There was a brief silence before he spoke again, the tone now more guarded. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I know," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I need your help. I need to understand the empire my father left behind." Another pause. Then he spoke again, this time with a hint of hesitation. "Your father wasn't an easy man to deal with, Mary. You may want to reconsider." But Mary didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for advice. I'm asking for your help. I need to know everything. His business dealings, his associates, his enemies. I need to understand what I've inherited." After a long breath, Richard sighed. "I'll meet with you tomorrow. Bring your questions." The call ended. As Mary sat back in her chair, she felt the weight of the decision settling over her. This was it. This was the path she was choosing. There was no turning back now. In the days that followed, she reached out to others, old partners, shadowy figures who had worked with her father but who she knew little about. Some were reluctant, unwilling to involve themselves in a woman who had no place in the world her father had built. Others, however, were eager to help, perhaps seeing an opportunity in Mary's newfound wealth and position. Mary didn't care about the motives of those who agreed to work with her. She only cared about one thing: taking down Andrew and Claire. She would use her inheritance to leverage her way into the rooms and decisions that had once been closed to her. As the network slowly took shape, the tension in Mary's chest began to ease, replaced by something else, a sense of purpose. She wasn't just playing defense anymore. She was preparing for war. The final piece of her plan began to take shape as well. She would confront Andrew, Claire, and the entire network of people who had stolen from her, and she would use everything at her disposal to make them pay. She couldn't reveal her hand just yet. She couldn't let them see what she was preparing. But when the time came, she would strike. For now, Mary kept her plans to herself, quietly building the tools she needed to dismantle the life that Andrew and Claire had stolen from her. And when she was ready, nothing would stop her from taking everything back. Andrew had always been a man who lived in his own world, one where money, power, and status were his lifeblood. He believed, with certainty, that once the divorce papers were signed, Mary would quietly fade into the background, her existence reduced to a mere footnote in his life. Claire, his mistress, would step into the role of wife at least. That was the plan. Sitting in the lavish condo he and Claire had chosen together, Andrew reveled in the idea of starting fresh. He had long ago convinced himself that Mary had been nothing more than an obstacle, a mistake he could easily rectify. Claire's laughter echoed through the rooms, as though they were already celebrating their victory. Andrew couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of relief. He was free, and the future seemed brighter than ever. But what Andrew didn't know was that Mary was no longer the same woman he had discarded. She had been changed by the betrayal, and now she had the power to change everything. Mary had been watching them quietly, from the shadows, gathering the pieces of the life Andrew and Claire had so carelessly built. Every conversation, every misstep Andrew had made in his dealings with Claire had been noted. She wasn't the woman she once was. Now, she was the one holding the cards. She had already reached out to her father's old allies, building a network of support that was growing stronger by the day. And with her newfound knowledge of her inheritance, its dark history and criminal connections, she was ready to make her move. It was time for her counterattack. Mary waited until the right moment. One afternoon, as Andrew met with Claire in their new home to discuss their plans for the future, Mary walked in, her steps deliberate and confident. She had dressed carefully, sharp, understated, but every movement exuded authority. They hadn't expected her so soon, hadn't expected her to be standing on her own 2 feet. Andrew froze when he saw her, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. Asterisk. What was she doing here? Asterisk. He wasn't ready for this. Not yet. But it was too late. I know what you've been doing, Andrew, Mary said, her voice calm but icy. I know about the deals you've made, about the money you've been funneling, the people you've been working with behind my back. Andrew opened his mouth to respond, but Mary raised a hand, stopping him cold. You thought I was just some naive woman who couldn't stand up for herself, didn't you? She took a step forward, her presence commanding the room. I have something you'll want to know. Something you'll wish you hadn't underestimated. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it onto the table between them. The papers inside it were filled with evidence, documents, contracts, names of shadowy figures, and financial records that tied Andrew's dealings to her father's empire. And her father's empire wasn't just built on legitimate investments. No, it was built on corruption, crime, and the kind of underhanded dealings Andrew had been too eager to take part in. Claire looked from Andrew to Mary, confusion flickering in her eyes. She hadn't expected this. Neither of them had. Mary leaned in slightly, her voice quiet but laced with menace. This is just the beginning. You've done enough damage, but I have the power to ruin you both. I'll take back everything you've tried to steal from me, and you won't even see it coming. For a moment there was only silence. The weight of Mary's words hung heavy in the room, a quiet storm gathering. Andrew and Claire exchanged looks, both of them realizing the same thing at the same time. Mary had the upper hand. The tables had turned. As she turned to leave, Mary's eyes met Andrew's one last time. "You'll regret thinking I was weak," she whispered. "This isn't over." She walked out, leaving Andrew and Claire to stew in the quiet storm of their own making. Mary didn't need to confront them directly, yet she didn't need to unleash everything at once. But the first blow had been dealt, and for the first time since the divorce papers were signed, Mary felt the power surge within her. Andrew and Claire thought they had won, but Mary knew better. The game had only just begun. No one deserves to be discarded after giving everything for someone they love. If you believe that standing up for yourself is the ultimate form of strength, subscribe now. This is only the beginning of Mary's journey, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The more Mary dug into her father's estate, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. What had started as an inheritance had quickly transformed into something darker, something she wasn't sure she could walk away from, even if she wanted to. The folders she had collected over the past few weeks now covered her entire dining table. Each one held more secrets than the last. But it wasn't until she came across the hidden dossier that the full weight of her father's criminal dealings became clear. This wasn't just business, it was a world of money laundering, fraudulent transactions, and dangerous connections. Mary's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages, each document revealing more of the empire her father had built. Offshore accounts, under-the-table deals with foreign officials, names she recognized, but only from whispered conversations, individuals who ran the kind of operations that didn't just ruin lives, but erased them completely. She knew these names were linked to Andrew's business dealings, his shady investments, and his connections with people who operated on the wrong side of the law. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, but it wasn't just the documents that gave her the power, no. It was what she could do with them, the people Andrew had crossed, the dirty money he'd funneled. The empire he had helped build, all of it, was now in her hands. Mary's father had set her up in a way Andrew never could have anticipated. She didn't just have the power to take back her inheritance, she could bring Andrew to his knees with a single move. A smile tugged at the corner of Mary's lips. She wasn't going to make a rash move, not yet. She would let Andrew believe he had won, let him think he was free of her. He was too arrogant, too consumed with his own sense of victory. But Mary wasn't going to fight him head-on. No, she had a far more devastating blow in mind. As she organized the files, her thoughts turned to Claire. She had known, from the very beginning, that Andrew wasn't the only one who had wronged her. Claire had played her part too, seducing Andrew, undermining Mary in every way possible, believing she would walk into a life of luxury with no consequences. But now, Mary could see Claire's role in the scheme. She was more than just Andrew's mistress, she was tied to the corruption in Andrew's world. Mary found a few key documents hidden deep within the stacked transactions that had Claire's name attached. They weren't as obvious as the ones involving Andrew, but there they were, financial dealings, illegal purchases, and a series of events that made it clear Claire had been far more involved in the criminal activities than she had ever let on. The thought of Claire's false innocence, her smug confidence, made Mary's blood boil. Mary took a deep breath, her gaze hardening. She wasn't going to confront Claire, not yet, but soon she would. Claire had thought she could control this situation, that she could waltz into Andrew's life and push Mary aside. But Mary had the ultimate trump card. For now, she kept her power in the shadows, quietly positioning herself for the right moment. Andrew and Claire were so sure of themselves, so certain they had won, they had no idea what was coming. Mary closed the dossier, a cold smile playing at the edges of her lips. The game was on, and she was about to make her move. The moment had come. Mary had been patient, biding her time, watching as Andrew and Claire reveled in what they thought was their victory. But now, the tables were set. The trap had been laid. It was time for them to understand the full extent of their mistake. The meeting was arranged at one of Andrew's favorite restaurants, a place where he had once celebrated his business deals, his accomplishments. Mary knew he wouldn't expect her to show up, especially not with the kind of power she now wielded. She had told Andrew she would be out of his life, that she'd disappear quietly, but the truth was, she wasn't leaving without a fight. She had already won. Andrew and Claire were sitting at a corner table when Mary arrived. Andrew looked exactly how she remembered him, confident, assured, the kind of man who never thought he could lose. Claire, sitting across from him, wore a smug expression, her eyes gleaming with the thought that Mary was finally out of the picture. As Mary approached the table, Andrew looked up, his smile faltering when he saw the folder in her hands. He had no idea what was coming. "Mary," he said, trying to keep his voice light, but there was a slight tremor beneath it. "I wasn't expecting you." Mary didn't respond immediately. She set the folder down in front of him, the weight of it alone making him pause. She could feel Claire's eyes on her, but she was focused entirely on Andrew. "You were expecting me to disappear, weren't you?" Mary's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "But I'm not the weak woman you thought I was." Andrew's brow furrowed as he flipped open the folder, his eyes scanning the contents. His smugness began to fade as he realized what he was looking at. Documents, financial records, business dealings, everything Mary had uncovered about his corruption, his money laundering, and his ties to dangerous people. "You think this is over?" Mary continued. "You and Claire have been playing a dangerous game. You've been using me, using my family's wealth, to fund your lies. But I've got the truth now, Andrew. And the truth is, everything you've built is built on lies, and I'm going to make sure it all comes crashing down." Andrew's face paled as he read further, the realization hitting him hard. His smug confidence crumbled with each new revelation. He had underestimated Mary, had believed that he could walk away unscathed, but now he understood that the game was no longer in his hands. Claire's face was a study in shock as she glanced at the papers in front of her, the weight of Mary's words sinking in. She had thought she was safe, that she had secured Andrew's future and, by extension, her own. But now she saw the truth. She was just a pawn in a much larger game, one that Mary had been quietly playing from the start. I didn't." Claire started to speak, but Mary cut her off. "You didn't think. You never did," Mary said coldly, "but now you will." Mary stood tall, her presence commanding the room. She wasn't the woman who had cried over Andrew's betrayal. She wasn't the victim who had been discarded. She was the one in control now, and Andrew and Claire were at her mercy. The power had shifted. Mary was no longer helpless. She wasn't going to let them win. And in this moment, she could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that they had underestimated her at every turn. "Everything you've worked for, your businesses, your reputation, it all ends today," Mary said, her voice calm but filled with an unshakable confidence. "And this time, you won't be able to run." As she turned to walk away, she left them with one final truth. Asterisk. This was her victory. Asterisk. The fall was swift. Mary watched from the sidelines as Andrew's world, his carefully constructed empire of lies, began to crumble. The truth was out now, and there was no escaping the damage. The documents she had presented to him, the ones that revealed everything about his financial misconduct, his criminal connections, and his exploitation of her inheritance, had set off a chain of events that Andrew could no longer control. The first blow came swiftly. His business partners, those who had once respected him, pulled away one by one. Andrew's name, once synonymous with success and trust, was now a mark of dishonor. The deals he had built his fortune on began to unravel, and with it his financial empire. The accusations of money laundering and fraud made their way through the media, and soon Andrew found himself fighting to protect what little he had left. The banks froze his accounts, investors fled, and his once pristine reputation dissolved into a sea of scandal. But the final blow was personal. Claire, who had once believed that she was the one who would walk away with everything, found herself entangled in the very web of deceit she had thought she could navigate without consequence. Legal authorities moved in swiftly, and Claire was named in multiple investigations related to Andrew's crimes. Her involvement in the money laundering schemes came to light, and her role in using Mary's inheritance for personal gain didn't go unnoticed. The woman who had once stood confidently by Andrew's side now faced legal battles of her own. Her future uncertain, her life turned upside down. Mary stood at the edge of the chaos, quietly observing as the world Andrew and Claire had built for themselves crumbled before them. Revenge, she realized, was sweeter than she could have ever imagined. She had used their own secrets against them, and now they were paying the price. But as satisfying as it was to see them falter, there was a part of Mary that knew the real victory was not in their downfall, it was in her own rise. With Andrew's empire in shambles, Mary took control of her father's estate. The billion-dollar inheritance now fully in her grasp, the power she had once thought was just a weighty responsibility had become her foundation. She gained control over the business, secured her own financial future, and began to untangle the mess her father had left behind. But it wasn't just the money that mattered, it was what the money represented. The power to reshape her life, to rebuild from the ground up. For the first time, Mary felt truly free. She had no need for revenge anymore. She had learned that the most powerful weapon was not money, it was self-worth, the power that came from within, from standing tall after all the betrayal, the hurt, and the abuse. The next chapter of Mary's life was hers to write. No longer defined by the toxic relationship with Andrew, no longer the victim of her circumstances, Mary was a woman who had reclaimed her identity. She knew her worth, and no one would take it from her again. She smiled to herself, the weight of the past falling away. The future was hers. The months following Andrew's fall were both a whirlwind and a calm, a strange mix of chaos and peace that Mary had never thought possible. The whirlwind came with the responsibilities of managing her father's empire, complex business dealings, an unfamiliar world of high-powered negotiations, and the weight of expectations that had once felt like chains now felt like a badge of honor. The calm, however, was within her, a deep sense of peace that had settled in her soul as she had learned to heal. With the inheritance secured, Mary had no need to prove anything to anyone. She had already proven more than enough. But she was no longer driven by bitterness or anger. She was driven by purpose. She threw herself into causes that mattered: women's empowerment, charitable foundations, organizations that helped those who had been discarded like she once had been. She had always wanted to make a difference in the world, but now she had the means to do so. She used her wealth not for excess, not for the show of it, but to fund initiatives that would change lives, the kind of change that didn't just affect individuals, but entire communities. She partnered with local organizations, supporting shelters for women and children, ensuring they had the resources to break free from cycles of abuse and poverty. She funded scholarships for young women who wanted to attend college, but lacked the means. Her vision had shifted. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about giving others the chance she had been denied, giving them the chance to rise, to reclaim their worth. Mary knew she was lucky. So many didn't have the opportunities she now had, the resources, the power. But she was determined not to squander it. The world had tried to break her, had tried to keep her small, to keep her down, but she had come out of the fire stronger and more focused than ever. As she sat in her new office, once a place she had feared walking into, now a symbol of everything she had accomplished, Mary allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought back to the woman who had walked into that sterile hospital room, betrayed and heartbroken, with a baby in her arms and a marriage that had just shattered. She thought of the helplessness she had felt, the overwhelming weight of the divorce papers, the cruel words from Andrew's mouth. But that woman, the one who had felt so powerless, was no more. In her place was a woman who had faced betrayal head-on, who had turned that pain into power, who had used her darkest moments to fuel her rise. Asterisk, I will never be that woman again. Asterisk, Mary thought. Her future was unwritten, and for the first time, she was the one holding the pen. She had the power to shape it in any way she wanted. The path ahead was hers to decide. But Mary knew one thing for certain. Revenge might have felt sweet, but the true victory lay in her redemption. She had learned that justice wasn't about destroying others, it was about healing herself. It was about reclaiming her life, her strength, and her voice. As Mary walked out of her office, her head held high, she understood the price of seeking justice, because in the end, the one who paid the price wasn't just Andrew, wasn't just Claire. The price was paid by the person who had to rise from the ashes, who had to learn how to forgive, how to heal, and how to walk forward without looking back. The future was hers, and it was bright. Mary's journey has just begun. Will she seek revenge, or will the weight of her past hold her back? To find out what happens next, subscribe now. Don't miss the rest of this powerful story. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out, and do well to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the next story.